Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Elaine, and I produce the Writing for Your Life conferences. Thank you for joining us at this very first Writing for Your Life online writers conference. Our hashtag is #Writing for Your Life if you would like to use it on social media. This evening I am here with Father James Martin. Father Martin is a Jesuit priest, culture editor of America Magazine, and author of numerous books, including My Life with the Saints, which Publishers Weekly named one of the best books of 2006. Father Martin has told me that he prefers me to call him Jim, so thank you, Jim, for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you here. I'm sure everyone is going to be anxious to learn more about your view of spiritual writing. So just so that everyone knows, there is a chat box on the side of the webinar, and you're welcome to put in your questions there. I'll ask Father Martin some of the questions that you send in, and then I have a whole list of questions myself that I'll be asking him. So why don't we get started with one of those? So let me first talk about the whole area of writing, and then later on we'll get into talking about social media and publishing and kind of other areas. But in terms of writing itself, how would you define the audience for your books?
Well, that's a good question. I tend to think, and this is going to sound strange, but the audience is everyone. And so, I try to write for everybody and not just Catholics. One of the things that I try to do is write for myself at age 27 before I entered the Jesuits. And so that person who was Catholic and Christian, obviously, because Catholics are Christian, didn't know a whole lot about religion or spirituality or theology, certainly nothing about theology. And so I try to write in a way that it is accessible to people who know nothing about religion, spirituality, faith, any of those kinds of things. I think that's really important. But I also try to assume that people are smart enough to be brought up to speed. So if I introduce the Jesuits, I'll say the Jesuits are a Catholic religious order of men. We take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. We live in community. We're probably best known for our educational institutions, and that's that. And then I'll move on and sort of assume that the reader can follow me. But the audience is very broad because I really am trying to reach, I would say educated people who read, people who are interested in faith, but also agnostics and atheists. And so it's pretty broad. It's certainly not just Catholics.
So you've written quite a few books. How have you chosen the themes for those books?
This is going to sound somewhat pious, but I do sort of trust that God is leading me in the topics. And so in the Jesuits, there's an idea that your desires are very important. So for example, on the simplest way of looking at it is that a man and a woman who desire one another are brought together out of spiritual desire, physical desire, emotional desire, and that God's kind of leading those two people together. And vocations work in the same way. So a person might desire to be a writer or, really love writing and reading and publishing, for example. And so that's a kind of desire that calls the person. And, I felt a desire to be a Jesuit and a desire to be a writer. Within that, though, I really feel that the things that I am sort of, let's say, on fire about are the things that I want to write about. So, for example, when I wrote My Life with the Saints, which is now out, and I'm plugging it because my publisher wants me to, 10th anniversary edition.
Excellent.
I really wanted to write about the Saints. I felt that there was a lack of, books that talked about the saints in their real lives. But I felt excited about writing about the saints. When I wrote about Jesus, I wrote a book called Jesus, a Pilgrimage a few years ago. I really felt the desire to write about Jesus. Like, I want to say something. So I trust that God is leading me. God doesn't sit on my shoulder like a bird and, chirp into my ear. I've seen pictures of saints where the Holy Spirit is telling them what to write. That's not how I see it. But I do feel like the things I'm interested in is what I'm called or invited to write about, which makes sense because if you think about it, I think the things that you're most excited about are the best topics, frankly. I mean, it's not kind of an assignment. If someone said, I assign you to write a book on whatever, on Mary or on Joseph, it would be hard for me rather than feeling that I want to write it. So I trust my desires.
Well, that's really great. And I know that from what I've heard of the different book agents and editors that I've been working with that they would say similar kinds of things, and that you really have to be passionate about what you're going after. Not
Yeah, and you hear that all the time, and I think part of it is, I mean, people can tell. It's the difference between writing something you're excited about and writing a term paper that you really want to just get through. I mean, people can tell. You also want to spend time. It also makes sense for a writer to spend time on something they're passionate about because you're going to have to spend a lot of time with it. A couple of years ago, I'll tell you a story. One publisher, I had a carpal tunnel syndrome for about the last 20 years. It's gotten better, thank God. But early on, it was very painful, and I wrote an article in America Magazine where I work about carpal tunnel syndrome. And this one publisher said, "Would you like to write a book on chronic pain?" Which is a legitimate topic. And I just said, I cannot imagine myself spending, 2 years thinking about that. It just seemed very heavy, and I wasn't really drawn to it at all. So, but someone else might be drawn to it. So I think part of it is trusting, as you say, what you're passionate about.
And I think, what the other, the agents and editors have told me is that in order to bring out the best in someone, they need that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense. When I was writing the book on Jesus, and I mean, a lot of it's, I believe, this is the Holy Spirit. I felt so excited about what chapter I was working on. So, for example, if I was doing a chapter about Jesus's life in Nazareth as a young man, I felt this great desire to know all I could about Nazareth, and I felt that was God kind of leading me, and that made for a better chapter. Now, even if you're not a believer, I think you can say to yourself, what am I the most passionate about? What really gets me excited? But I know people who have written books, on spec, which is, what do I want to say? A noble profession. And it's hard for them sometimes because it's an assignment basically. But, I take a vow of poverty, so I don't have to worry about money, or the money that comes in goes to my community. And I don't have to worry about making a living in a sense. So I have a little more freedom than most people. So I think I need to say that too.
Sure, sure. So I know that you are a very, very busy man. You do a tremendous number of things in many different directions. So how do you balance all of that with time to write?
Yeah, my joke is poorly. Yeah, I really have had to think about that a lot in the last few months because I've gotten, for whatever reason, super busy accepting lots of different things. I find personally that I write best in the morning. I know a lot of writers say that. I'm fresh. I will have thought about what I want to write the night before. Now, here's something maybe writers won't believe, but I never have writer's block because I'm writing about something I'm excited about, right? So I want to write about it. I have a lot I want to say. So right now I'm working on a book on prayer. Well, I got a lot to say about prayer. I mean, I've been doing this for being a Jesuit for almost 30 years, unbelievably. And I've done spiritual direction and retreats. I have a lot to say. So no writer's block. But also, I don't spend 10 hours at the computer so that I get, kind of tired of it. And I give myself, partially because of the carpal tunnel, but partially because I'm working at America Magazine, a full-time job, I give myself about an hour and a half or two to write in the morning. And so I really do block out that time, and I love that time. I do find personally that I write better when my life is quieter. So if I'm running from place to place and going to some speaking engagement in another city, and I come back and I'm busy, I find that very difficult. It's the times when I'm the most personally quiet and centered and stable, and that I can write the best. I think there's something about the writing life that demands a kind of quiet and contemplative approach. So, but making time for it has never been a problem because I enjoy it so much. I mean, frankly, if my hands were working perfectly well, I would be happy to write for 5 hours a day.
Well, I think many of the other authors would be quite jealous of the fact that you never have writer's block.
I know, but see, part of it is, it's interesting. I think part of it is that the vow of poverty means that I do not have to write a commercially successful book, right? So, and if you're writing, let's say I was a biographer, and I was doing a biography of, I'll pick one of my favorite people, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, there's all sorts of things that I have to do. I have to go to the library. I have to check these things. I don't have to do that. It's not an assignment. I can write about whatever I want. So I think that makes it a little easier for me. And I wait till I have something to say, which is different than someone who has to earn a living doing it. So I'm in a little of a different category. But I think one of the insights that people might take is, write something that write about what you enjoy, and it'll be a lot easier, I think.
Yeah, I think it goes back largely to what you said before about what you're passionate about and what you're called to do.
Yeah, and to trust that. If you're a believer, to trust that God is kind of leading you in that direction, and you have certain desires and passions for a reason, that it's for the good of other people. If you're a non-believer, to say that it's simply a practical reason. It's just practical, that you will do better when you are writing about something you like.
So a question from Angie is, do you pray before you write each time?
Yeah, always. I mean, I pray in the morning, so then I usually pray from 8 to 8:30. That's my morning prayer, and then I go right into writing. So I do. Yeah, and I'm very aware of it as writing itself as a prayer, and also I write as a Jesuit, to use the Jesuit term, help souls. So everything I'm writing is to help people. And I remember someone told me once, another writer said, well, why do you write? And I said, to help people. And he said, that's a terrible reason to write. And I said, sorry.
That's a terrible reason to write?
It is a terrible reason to write.
Wow.
You should write to create a work of art. And if it helps people, that's fine. And I said, well, I'm a Jesuit, and this is sort of what I do. So, that's not going to work for me. But and I would imagine there's some novelists who do that. It's not to help people; it's to kind of create or express themselves. And maybe if you said to Picasso or Van Gogh or Rembrandt, "Are you painting this picture to help people?" Maybe the answer would be no. So, but for me, everything I do is to help people.
Well, I think it's a wonderful example for all of us to follow. So, when you first started writing, were there specific authors who you admired and sought to follow after or learn from?
Yeah, I thought you might ask something like that, especially on spiritual writing. There really are three who I looked to and who were an inspiration to me. The first was Thomas Merton, so the famous Trappist monk, American, who left his life in 1941 to enter a Trappist monastery in Kentucky. His book, The Seven-Story Mountain, which was published in 1948, I think, is the great autobiography, I think, of Catholic 20th century. That and The Long Loneliness by Dorothy Day. And I stumbled upon that book when I was 25, and it really changed my life, because the story, not the writing per se, oh, that was very powerful. In fact, I just gave it to a young man who started at work here, which is kind of fun. But his story about leaving the world, entering the monastery, was really dramatic. And it was the first, I think this is right, it's the first spiritual autobiography I'd ever read. It talked about God, talked about his struggles. So Merton has always stayed with me. And then since then, I've read a lot of his other stuff. Second is Henry Nouwen, Nouwen, for those people who don't know him, Dutch priest, who is seen by many people as a kind of successor to Merton, who also wrote in the very autobiographical vein. His book, The Return of the Prodigal Son, is extraordinary. And a lot of his, I really appreciated autobiographical narrative and spiritual writing in that vein, because I think it's much more accessible than straight theology. There's nothing wrong with straight theology, but there's something inviting about the personal. And then finally, Kathleen Norris, who's written books a little more contemporary. She's still alive. We're friends. The Cloister Walk, Acedia and Me, Dakota, just these beautiful essays about the spiritual life. And one of the great insights that I got from one of her books was, this is my first book that I did, called This Our Exile. It was about working in East Africa. And maybe this will help some writers. I always share this with people, and they really like it. Kathleen Norris's book, Dakota and Cloister Walk, are basically a series of essays. You probably know them, Brian, I'm sure.
Yes, no, absolutely.
They're a series of essays about Dakota, living in Dakota, about her time as an oblate a sort of associate of a Benedictine monastery. And it dawned on me, I told her this years later, that what she was doing was she had a series of essays that she put together, in a sense, in a chronological way. And this is, I think, one of the most helpful things I got from her book and that I share with writers. When I sat down to write this first book called This Our Exile, I thought there's no way I could write a 250-page book. I just can't do that. I just couldn't imagine sitting down and writing it. But I can write 10 25-page essays or 25 10-page essays, which it turned out to be, and put them together. So it was really freeing for me, really freeing, because the idea of I wouldn't even know how do you structure a 250-page book or a 300-page book. Okay, but I thought what Kathleen Norris did, she's writing these essays that are connected, in a way, and then it's just easier that way for me to look at a book like that. So the book on prayer right now, it's different essays, and everybody can write an essay, and then you string them together, and you smooth it out, and you kind of make it more chronological, and you have a book. So that was not only her writing, but her structure really helped me as well.
I can relate to that totally in terms of the less daunting aspect of writing an essay as opposed to writing a book.
Yeah. Who could sit down and write a book?
Especially when you do it for the first time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the second time you get a sense, I can do this, and I don't have to. I think what I envisioned as a writer. I mean, it's funny. I don't talk too much about writing. I talk more about spirituality and priesthood and stuff like that. So it's fun to talk about this. I envisioned sitting down, chapter 1. I mean, it's just impossible. How can you write that? And in fact, I wrote the different essays for that first book, and I still do it this way, out of order. And what I'm sort of most interested in. So the book on East Africa called This Our Exile, I wrote the one chapter on working in the slums. What was that like? Another chapter on this one refugee woman I knew. Another chapter on food in East Africa, just, what I was interested in. And then I put it all together. An instant book.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I know you have an educational background in theology, and I know you have an educational background in business, since we both went to the Wharton School of Business, although a different
Penn.
So how did you develop your writing skills and style?
Well, I hope it's a skill. I had a very good series of teachers in high school. I went to a public high school, not a Catholic high school. I always remind people. And there was one teacher named Miss Baker who was our, I believe, 10th grade English teacher, and she was just tough on us and, taught us how to write. I always liked to read. My parents are big readers. My father is dead, but my mom is still a big reader. They were both books in the house all the time. So I read a lot, and I enjoyed reading. I would read things like Gene Shepherd, the humorist, those kinds of things. When I was little, I would read, history books and biographies and things like that. Scholastic books was a big part of my growing up. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Scholastic books.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, very big part of my growing up. Very exciting to get the Scholastics books. And so, in high school, I was taught to write. I wrote it for the yearbook, but, it wasn't like I was a writer. I wanted to be a writer. And then when I went to the University of Pennsylvania, to the Wharton School, your alma mater too, there was very little, no teaching about writing. I mean, it was all numbers, basically. And, I wrote some reports, but nothing. I entered the Jesuits, and, I read a bit, and I never considered writing. When I was in my philosophy studies, someone invited me to do an article for a Jesuit magazine, which I did. I thought, okay, And then I wrote for the Pennsylvania Gazette, the Penn alumni magazine. A quite long article on entering the Jesuits, which I pitched to them. And I thought, well, this is kind of fun. And then when I was in Kenya, in East Africa, working with the Jesuit Refugee Service, this was kind of the turning point. I felt that what I was seeing was so interesting and really needed to be, I wanted to tell it, that I wrote about it. And I'll tell you a funny story. I sent it in once to America Magazine, and it was an interview with a refugee, just a straight interview, which was very, there was no context, there was no nothing, and it was rejected. And so they sent it back. And not knowing anything about publishing or magazines, I wrote to the editor here, who I ended up getting to know. And I said, well, what's wrong with it? And he said, well, there's no context. So I changed it. I sent it back, which, you really never do. And they rejected it again. And I said, not knowing, I said, well, what was wrong with it? And he said, well, there's not a lot of flavor in it. There's not a lot of color. Since then, I visited a refugee camp. And so I mixed in the interview with my visit to the camp, so it's this man's experience of leaving Somalia, my experience of going to a camp, and that got published. And then when I finished my time in East Africa, I was sent here for a year to America, and that really got me started. So, in terms of a style, I try to be accessible and inviting, and I try to do it in a conversational way. So I think I try to write as I speak. And I try to make it accessible, inviting, clear. I always say to people, Jesus didn't speak in, unless you look at the Gospel of John, Jesus didn't speak in sort of high-flown language, and there's no reason for us to either.
I think that's a great story, just the way that you got started.
It's crazy. When I look at it now, I would say, who is this lunatic? We already rejected his article. Why is he sending it back again? But sometimes ignorance really can be helpful.
Well, everyone's got, a strange, windy path, it seems like, in terms of
how
they got started with their writing. So
yeah, that's that line, God writes straight with crooked lines. Have you heard that?
Exactly.
Yeah, so he took care of it, or she took care of
it. So here's a great question from Melissa. She says, sometimes it seems that everything has already been written in the realm of spiritual writing. How do you make sure that your words and concepts are fresh and new without forcing the words to sound profound or forced?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I don't think you should force them to seem profound. I mean, I think you should just tell your experiences and tell your insights and your own wisdom the way you would talk to a friend. So I don't think you need to make, actually it's funny. The temptation is I sometimes see like note cards with these profound sayings on them, like from Thomas Merton. And I say, I should put some more profound sayings in my book so that they could get excerpted. But it ends up sounding, for me, false. So I think you should just write, what you write and write what you know. As far as, how are you sure that those things will have never been said before? They may have been said, and so, there's 2,000 years of Christian history, and before that, more history of the Jewish people, and, there's the Psalms, there's the Gospels, there's a good chance that something like that has been said, but it's not been said by you. And it's not been filtered through your experience. So you will necessarily say it differently. We like talking about, let's take an example of like a mother and a child. Have there been books written about children? Yes. Have there been books written about your child and the way you feel towards your child? No. And that's valuable. That's a story. So I think just being yourself and kind of trusting yourself is paramount.
I think that makes a whole lot of sense. I think that's good advice, because I think a lot of people try to avoid maybe too much than what they should. But in any event,
it's hard not to, when you're writing a spiritual book, it's hard not to strive for this sentence is going to change the world.
So, on your different books, have you worked closely with an editor on them?
Yes. I've worked with different publishing companies along the way. Orbis Books, excellent. The different sort of approaches. Paulist Books. Orbis did This Our Exile. Sheet Ward did a book called In Good Company, and a few other books that I did. Paulist Books did Becoming Who You Are, and then I moved to Loyola. They did a great job with My Life with the Saints, and then Jesuit off Broadway, and then I started with Harper One. And at each juncture, I've had good editors. Now, different editors edit differently, and I think probably what people will find is that it's rare to have kind of line editing done. By which I mean literally going through. A lot of times it'll be sort of at 30,000 feet. Make this chapter shorter, focus on this. And so I actually have used in the past. I've actually hired meaning the publishing house hires it, or my magazine hires it, and then the money comes to us. I've hired line editors. I find they're invaluable. I want to tell you my favorite story. about editing. May I tell you a story about editing?
Of course, of course.
This will help. So one of the greatest copy editors in the business is a woman named Vinita Wright.
Oh, I know Vanita.
Oh, she is just the best. The
And
best.
she's written a great book about writing a memoir.
Yes, yes, and she wrote another book called Days of Deepening Friendship, which is about spirituality. She's the best. So here's my story. So when I did my book, My Life with the Saints, she edited it, and I had been edited before, and very well by Orbis and Paulist and Sheedham Ward and Ligori, and but this was a different level. And there was a chapter in there. It's about my encounters and my relationships with 20 or so Catholic saints. Excuse me, like through prayer and reading about their lives, and each chapter had a little bit of personal narrative to introduce it, a little bit of the saint's life, and a little bit of sort of spiritual reflection. And the chronology which was I got from Kathleen Norris again, was to do the separate saints' lives, but the insight was if I put them in the order that I met them in my life, I could tell kind of a spiritual journey myself. So I started as a boy who's devoted to St. Jude, and then Joan of Arc, and then you sort of follow my life through that. Anyway, there was a chapter on Thérèse of Lisieux, the Carmelite nun. So long story short, there was a long wind-up in there about working at a movie theater when I was young, because I ended up being introduced to Thérèse of Lisieux through a movie called Thérèse by Alain Cavalier, which is a great movie. So I wanted to tell the story about movies and how much I like movies, and that led up to the movie and Thérèse. Well, I tell the story about working as a movie theater usher, and in this chapter I have 3 funny stories. Making popcorn, putting up the marquee late at night, and something else. Some other crazy story. So it's you can probably already see, a long wind-up. And Vanita said, one story. And I said, no, people like these funny stories. They're really funny. It's a funny story. They like, they like personal narrative. She said, one story is enough. Just get to the point. And I said, and I was really, so this is 10 years ago. I'm 55 now. I was 45, so it wasn't like I was a kid. I said, no, 3 stories. One story. And she said the quote that I always use for writers, which is this. Vanita said to me, if I, who am getting paid to read this, think that it is too many stories, what will someone who pays to read this think?
Oh, that's a great one.
And that was that. I said, of course. She's right. I mean, and I think that's
a great way to think of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great insight for writers, or I hope a helpful lesson.
Yes.
If your editor is now, I mean, there's some, obviously you don't need to take everything the editor says, but if the editor is very strong about this is not working, this is too long, I don't understand this, then you haven't made yourself clear. You just haven't. You can't say, oh, no, it is understandable, when the person says, I don't understand it. Or, no, this is funny. Now, there's some things where you might say, no, I really, for me, I need to keep that in this little part. But that was very helpful for me. And I remember the first editor-in-chief that I had here at American Magazine, Father George Hunt, said, and I remember my response, the best writers don't mind being edited. And I laughed and I said, well, I must be the worst writer ever. But now it's hard. I mean, it's hard when it, for writers must know this. It's hard when it comes back. Even if you work with the editor at your publishing house and they know what you're doing. You give them like an outline and you say, I'm doing this. And it's hard when it comes back and they say, this does not work. And you realize when you're writing, you can have that sort of internal editor saying they're going to say they don't like this. I was doing that today. I was telling a couple of stories and I thought they're going to cut this out. But it's necessary. It just is. And at the end, you're always happy you took that advice. So that's Vanita's line. You remember that's Vanita's rule.
That's great. I will. I'll tell her that you told the story.
Oh, it was so clarifying. And she was right. The chapter as I read it now is, my gosh, if I'd had one funny story about working at a movie theater, I went into how much I love movies, and it led to Thérèse. If I had 3 funny stories about working in the movie theater, who cares?
So, if there's a question from Kerry, who is a Catholic and working on a book that draws on his faith, um, but he hasn't published before. So, given the different publishers that you've worked with, do you have any recommendation which would be best for a Catholic first-time writer?
You know, I'm going to throw out some names. They are all very good. I have had good experience with all the Catholic presses. They're really, and one of the reasons they're good to work for is that they are people who understand, excuse me, spiritual writing. Whereas if you went with a big house, they might not get it. You know, my Harper One's great, but you know, I've heard other stories where, well, I mean, I had a book once where one of my agents pitched it to this big publishing house before I went to Harper One, and they said we need more controversy in it. It was the book on the saints. It's not controversial enough. I said I'm not going to change it. So Catholic publishing houses understand it. So I'll tell you the ones that I have had the most experience with. I think Loyola is spectacular. Loyola Press is just spectacular. They do a wide variety of things. They do a lot of Jesuit spirituality. They do a lot of catechetical material. I think Orbis Books is excellent. They're doing a lot of stuff on social justice. They're run by the Mary Knoll Fathers and Brothers. Social justice, the poor. Ave Maria is excellent. I'm trying to think now. I'm escaping. Paulist is terrific. You know, Paulist does consistently great work. They're all good. So, you know, Loyola, Orbis, Paulist, Ave Maria. I know I'm skipping some. Sheet and Ward is very good. Roman and Littlefield. So yeah, you know, I think that here's what I always tell people: go to a bookstore, go to a Catholic bookstore. This is to Kerry. Go to a Catholic bookstore, see what they're doing. Look through if you're doing spirituality or memoir or saints or prayer. Go and see who's doing books that seem like the ones that you like. See how they present them. See how they look. You know, see how, see what you think. And then
see who the publishers are.
Yeah, and then go for it. And then, try to approach them, I would say, one by one.
This is exactly the same advice as our last speaker this afternoon gave. Chris
Good.
Garvey is an agent. And, he said the exact same thing. It's like, find the books that are the most similar to what you're trying to do and find out who the publishers are, find out who their agents are.
Yeah, and they'll get you too. So if you're doing a book on, I'm going to make something up. If you're doing a cookbook, a spiritual cookbook, which, who knows, maybe we can do it. It's kind of a cool idea. And there is for example, I know that for matter of fact, Liguori Press did cookbooks a while ago. They did, cookbooks of, monastic soups and stuff like that. Well, they're going to kind of get it. It's not going to be this big sell. You're not going to have to bang down the door. Whereas another publishing house will be like, well, I don't think so. So, you start with the ones that are comfortable with what you're doing, and that it might even have an editor, and that actually might have people in the marketing department that have already sold those books, and so that they know, what markets that they'll be good at, because you have to think about how it's going to be sold as well.
So, are you working on any new books that you can talk to us a little bit about?
Yeah, I'm working on a book called How to Pray, which my joke is it's called How to Pray, and it's about how to pray. So it's I did a book a couple years ago called The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, and that had some prayer in it, but this is everything. This is like full-throated. Every chapter is on prayer. It's a lot of fun. I feel like I'm doing some research, but I don't have to do a lot of research because I do a lot of spiritual direction. So it's kind of my teaching people about prayer. It's a lot of fun. It probably won't be done for another 2 years. So
is it going to be a Harper One book, or
yes, yeah, Harper One's kind of my publisher now. I do I'll do forwards and stuff for other presses, but I'm sort of with Harper One.
So is there any general advice that you have for people that are just beginning their writing career?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, read good writing. That's the first thing. So read people, who you admire. Read a lot of Kathleen Norris and Henry Nouwen and Frederick Buechner and Robert Barron and, all your favorite writers. And read good novels, right? Read good contemporary novels to see how people write. Because what happens is you start to develop an ear for what sounds good and what doesn't sound good, what works, what rhythm means, right? I've never taken any writing courses, but you start to realize, wow, this is really beautifully written, and then you kind of get into a kind of a rhythm. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, try to start, very modestly. So try to do some essays. Try to get some essays placed in Catholic magazines or in Christian magazines or wherever, in your local newspaper. Just start to kind of get the idea of what it's like to write essays. I think that's a good way to start. And then, write something you're passionate about. The other bit of advice is don't be afraid of getting rejected. I mean, that is just, I know it sounds like a cliche, but I've been rejected by, in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, on and on and on. And don't take it too personally. It could be the editor just got up on the wrong side of the bed, or they published an article just like yours, and just keep pitching, and then soon you'll have a body of work, and soon you'll be able to take that to a publisher. And if it's a book, I think, write what you're passionate about, find a good agent, find a good publisher.
So if we could, I'd like to go down a different avenue of discussion.
Sure.
To talk about social media.
Sure.
Because you're very active on social media and you've grown a wonderfully large platform. Can you say how you did it?
Yeah, well, funny enough, today I started on Snapchat. Just today. Well, a lot of it is thanks to Loyola Press, my friends at Loyola Press. Years ago, probably, I'm terrible with I've always thought I'd be terrible in a courtroom if they say, where were you? I'd say, I have no idea. Throw me in jail. Loyola Press, after I think My Life with the Saints came out 2006, so this would be 709. Said that I should get a Facebook page, a public Facebook page, and I said no way. I don't need another thing to do. I don't need another thing to worry about. I don't need another thing to post. I'm not interested. And they were really strong about it. No, it'll help, and no, I'm not interested. I think that's baloney. I think it's vain. Well, now, so I got it, and I started to realize this is kind of a ministry. It's kind of a ministry to share things with people, to connect people with different articles, and then I really enjoyed that. And then the next thing was Twitter, which I thought was stupid at first. This is stupid. It's all, at the time, it was all celebrities tweeting about, whatever their vodka they drank or something. And I saw that as a ministry too, so I got more and more interested in that. And you get used to it, and you get sort of a sense of what works. 2 years ago maybe, the young woman in our office, Ashley McKinless, was talking about Instagram. I said, "What's Instagram?" And she said, "Well, a lot of young people are getting tired of Facebook, and so they put pictures on there." I thought, "Well, I'll try that." Well, okay. Now I love it, so I'm on Instagram. And today, I was talking to 3 young people in our office, Ashley, Wyatt, and Zach. They're all in their 20s. I said, "Tell me about Snapchat. Is it stupid? Is it crazy?" So I had a little tutorial, and I just snapped. I snapped. I don't even know what to say. I think you snap, or you post your snaps, or you post your story. So what is it? It's a ministry. It's a way to reach people. I had a bishop a couple years ago said, really, in a very clearly, it was meant to be disparaging tone. "You're on Facebook?" This is years ago. And I said, now all the dioceses have Facebook pages. And I said, yeah. And they said, why? And I said, because that's where the people are. And Jesus didn't sit on his butt and wait for people to come to him. He did sometimes. Sometimes people came to him, but most of the time he went out. And here's the thing. I always say, he spoke in a medium they could understand. The medium was, for example, like the parable. And he spoke in a language they could understand. So the medium here is social media, and the language is very accessible and inviting: videos, meditations, articles. So, yeah, I consider it a media. It is. I consider it a ministry. And also people who are embarrassed to go to like a priest or a sister or a brother or a pastoral worker will connect through Facebook. And so I've heard that a lot, which is gratifying.
Well, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, people didn't have much of a choice in terms of sources for spiritual thought.
Right.
Other than to go to a church or a synagogue
Or pick up a
everybody,
book. Right.
right, right. But now, I mean, with the explosion of the internet, I think more and more people are getting their spiritual fulfillment through social media and other things online.
Well,
So,
they are, and I think there's pluses and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, 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 go ahead.
I was going to say there's pluses and minuses. The pluses are just what you said, which is that people are able to connect in that way and are able to ask questions and explore. And before, when I read The Seven Story Mountain at age 25, I saw a TV show about Thomas Merton. I didn't know who he was, and I went into the Barnes and Noble in Stamford, Connecticut, and I picked out this book. I didn't know who he was, and I was able to read that in private. And I read C.S. Lewis and Thomas Merton, and I didn't know any. I didn't know who to read. I didn't know. I just went into the bookstore and looked under Christian, but it was a very private way of doing it, and it wasn't threatening to me because I didn't have to go to say to someone, "Oh, I'm interested in whatever, being a priest or a Jesuit." That's what social media does today. So it's a plus. The minus is that it can sometimes you can be tempted to have that as a substitute for real connection, prayer, community, service, right? I mean, really, you can just keep clicking. And, because religion's about other people as well. It's social because we're social animals. So that's the danger. So it's like anything. It's good and it's bad. I mean, you can say the same thing about books. You can have your nose in a book all day and not go out of that. So pluses and minuses.
Well, just think about when television first came around,
Oh,
or
sure.
radio just came around, or they were incredible distractions from what people experienced before that. And just as you're saying, with social media, you have to figure out what the right balance is
Right,
for you.
right. But it is, I mean, I would say, speaking to writers now, it's invaluable for a writer. I think that the challenge is, and I struggle with this, it cannot be, I always tell people this, it cannot be simply an advertisement for your books. Like buy my book, here's another excerpt, because people will turn it off. It needs to be a place that's a lot more and where people feel comfortable and where you can help them. And so, for example, like today I posted an interview that I did with Mary Carr about this book I did called The Abbey, which was my first novel, because it was the paperback came out this week. So I put a little YouTube video up. No, I can't do that every day. I wouldn't want to because it's very, very vain. But also people get tired of that. Who the hell wants to see, ads on your Facebook page all the time? So it needs to be more of a kind of place where people can encounter something. So it can't be just ads.
And there's some authors that do that very well, and some authors that don't. I've watched various people that know how to achieve that balance, and others who don't, which is really
the other thing I should say, since this is spiritual writing, there's a great danger in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, I guess, of me, and my face. And I was talking to the young people today, and I said, I don't want it to be, like, let me take a picture of me. And I know some authors' Instagram accounts, it's just their faces. I mean, I can't believe it. And so I consciously, I mean, in terms of like a threat to humility, I consciously, really work against not putting my face on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Now, sometimes you can't avoid it. So, for example, like the notice for tonight's webinar, had my face on it. So, so I'm not going to not post that because it has my face on it. But if there's a way that I can do it without my face, I try to do it. And also, in promoting yourself, it should be promoting other people too. So it's a danger. It can really be a danger. But I would say, frankly, nothing turns me off more, particularly in the spiritual world, frankly, than Instagram accounts or Facebook pages where it's like, oh, you know what a humble brag is? Have you heard that? Do you know what a humble brag is? Have you heard that expression?
No.
A humble brag would be if you get an award and you say, oh, I feel so unworthy to get this award that I'm now going to tell you about. Or, boy, I felt so out of place among so many wonderful people when I got the so-and-so award, or when I was asked to speak. Yes, people can see through that in a minute. So it's best to just try to really work against that temptation to fame and pride.
I think it's wonderful advice. So how do you balance kind of the time commitments associated with social media without it interrupting, the rest of your daily flow?
Well, that's a very good question, Brian. I'm the time constraints aren't so bad. Well, that's not very grammatical. The time I don't find the time constraints constraining. So I'll post maybe 5 things on Facebook a day, maybe, and then I'll monitor the comments. If it's really heated, I'll have to monitor more. I'll post 1 or 2 pictures on Instagram. Maybe one. I'll tweet maybe 5 or 6 times a day. God knows about Snapchat. The difficulty. So it's not really that time consuming, and I enjoy it. And also the other thing is, if I don't post for a couple hours, who cares? I mean, people aren't waiting for me to post something. Um, and if I'm away from it, if I'm traveling, I don't feel a desire. I mean, I think it's sometimes good to have a kind of break. The more difficult thing is kind of getting wrapped up in it emotionally. So if people are saying all these terrible things, or if you're getting trolls, there are many Catholic trolls in the Twitterverse, the Twitter sphere, whatever it's called. Instagram's not so bad. That's the harder part. It's how to be detached from that. I get attacked frequently on Twitter mostly. Facebook, people, there's a ban and delete button, which is great. And I mean, really, like people people can say what they want, and I don't have to agree with them. But if it's really ad hominem, rude, cruel, or excessive, where people just ban and delete them. In Twitter, there's something called a mute button where you don't see it. So it's more the emotional thing, and it's being detached from that and saying that you can't kind of get involved in that. You can't sort of be drawn into it because it can be really toxic. That's the other bad thing about social media.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise, a lot of.
Well, especially with religion, because everybody thinks they have God on their side. So I always say there's crazy people and there's religious crazy people, and the religious crazy people are crazier than the crazy people because they have God and they're right, and you're a heretic. So I mean, critiques are fine, but I mean, sometimes it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think some people, as you said, get drawn into it so much that it hurts them.
Yeah, and especially right, the authors do. You cannot.
Yes.
You cannot. It's funny. I had someone write something about me a couple weeks ago, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, are you okay?" And I said, "I had," which was a grace. I had zero emotional reaction, zero, because in the end, who cares? So
good for you.
Yeah, but it's good if it's legitimate criticism, like, Father, I don't understand what you're saying, or did you mean to say this? You respond. Like someone said today, I tweet out a gospel, like a little homily every morning, and it was about I'm going to forget it. Someone had it was about there were 4 women at the foot of the cross and 1 man, and I said we need to think about that in terms of women leadership. And someone wrote, I don't understand what you mean. That's a great question. Isn't that a non sequitur about the gospel, which is about Mary at the foot of the cross? And I said, no, what I'm saying is women exercised leadership in the early church in a very unique way. One of them was this fidelity to Jesus who was suffering, and that's what I meant. That's a great question. Not, sure, you're a heretic, or take off your collar. I mean, that's useless, and I don't need to listen to that.
So can you compare a little bit on social media channels which you find to be the most effective?
That's great. Facebook is more of a community and provides people with more of a place to discuss. I view it as my public page is a place for people to have conversations. I'm talking about public pages, which are different than personal pages.
Right.
To share information, to connect. That's how I view it. So personal page is different. Personal page is more sharing your life and your family and things like that. I stay away from that. So there's more space. There's more time. You can write more. Twitter, I would say, is mainly news now. Mainly a way to keep up. There's I try to put out some inspirational things, but mainly news. That's a little bit more contentious because people can be more anonymous. People can just flame you right there. It doesn't take a lot of effort to come up with an account. Instagram is beautiful images, and I think people are much more relaxed about that. I mean, you put an image of the Blessed Mother up, people aren't going to say you're a heretic, right? But it can be beautiful. I put up an image of Mother Teresa with a little meditation about how she's the greatest saint of modern times because of her darkness, that she had to. I had like 3,000 likes. People were so happy. Wow. Yeah. Snapchat, I have no idea. I've been on it for 8 hours, so they do have different kind of flavors. And I think it's important for writers to kind of, like Mary Carr, one of my favorite writers. She's on Twitter, and Joyce Carol Oates. Follow Joyce Carol Oates. I don't always agree with her, but boy, does she tweet. She's out there a lot, and it's good. And the news mainly for Twitter.
Uh-huh. I think that's pretty useful to for people to understand that perspective. So I know who your book agent is, but and we don't have to talk about him specifically. But can you talk about how you selected your first book agent?
Yeah, well, my first book agent, I can say, Don Cutler, is my only book agent. I've only ever had one. And how did it happen? He was the agent of a friend of mine, and I didn't really know if I needed an agent because I'd been dealing with Loyal Press directly very easily, But then when I went to Harper One, someone said you need an agent, and Harper One's great to do with. They're lovely. So here was my, you always have these stories like the story with Vanita. The story with the agent was that he said to me, Don said to me, you need an advance for this book. Now, I took a vow of poverty. All my money goes to the community. And I said, I don't need an advance. I've never had an advance. I don't need it. I'd rather have it in the marketing budget. So no, you need an advance. I said, the community can get the money now or they can get it later. It doesn't matter. He said, the advance tells the marketing department in the publishing house that this is an important book. Now, I would have never, ever known that.
Really?
So the agent knows all these things, dealing with contracts, and then also, the agent, for someone who's a new writer, particularly, gets your foot in the door. And a lot of publishers would prefer to deal with agents. Not all of them. Catholic publishers are actually very good about it. They don't have to, but in other words, they don't always need to see an agent. They will deal with people directly. But for the big publishing houses, the secular publishing houses, the mainstream publishing houses, they generally want an agent. And so it's very helpful. It's well worth it. He has helped me so much with, also like deadlines and negotiating that if you need to. I'm always very much on time, but, one time I needed a big deadline. Very helpful. He was, and my publisher's great, but it's nice to have someone who kind of can be kind of a buffer and can kind of advise you and help you. It's really invaluable. He's been terrific. Well worth the percentage.
So have you ever considered self-publishing? That's a new trend. Have you thought about that at all?
No, I mean, because I have a publisher now, but I know a lot of people who do self-publish. There's a book that we got in. Oh my gosh, I'm going to forget the title. I can't. It's a novel. I wish I could remember it. But self-published and doing very well. I still think that the publishing houses, no matter who they are, no matter if they're small publishing house, they just have better distribution. They can get you on Amazon better. They get reviews. They get in bookstores. They have places to go that you wouldn't be able to get to. And I just, bookstores basically, and they have catalogs, and I just think it's better. Now, that being said, I think that, I know a lot of people who have self-published and have done very well. So, but for me, I prefer publishing. I mean, I prefer sort of having a publishing house.
So at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about, the fact that your books are attractive to a wide audience, and that you write for.
I hope so. I try to make them attractive. Yeah.
Do you see an increasing crossover between faith traditions?
In what way?
Meaning that books are not as limited to one faith tradition as to what they maybe were in the past.
Yeah, I think it depends on the book. I mean, there are some books, I'm working from the Catholic world, Catholic land, I call it. There are some books that are really very Catholic. They're written by Catholics, they're published by Catholic publishing houses, they're for Catholics. So that's kind of hard to, for a non-Catholic reader to read that might be difficult. There's a certain language and vocabulary and assumptions that are used. But I don't write that way. I really think spirituality should be for everyone. So I really try to write for everybody. Now, I think most of my readers, are Catholics and Christians. but not all of them. And a lot of agnostics and seekers, come to me. So I think it depends. To answer your question, Brian, I think it depends on the book. I don't know if there's a big move towards kind of, opening up that way. I think it depends on the author and the book. Now, publishing houses obviously want everybody to read it, but it still depends on the author.
Uh-huh. So let's just switch to another topic, live speaking events. Do you do quite a few of those? Do you have any coming up?
I have one coming up Saturday, yeah, in Philadelphia. I do quite a bit of that. I find that they're very gratifying. They can be tiring, I do a lot at churches, retreat houses, Catholic colleges, Catholic universities, conventions, those kinds of things, fundraising events. I think for the spiritual writer, you really can get a sweet spot. If you speak at a parish, so I'm speaking as a Catholic, that is your target market. And that is worth, 10 Barnes and Nobles. Because you go to a parish, you got a market that really is interested in your writing and your books and Catholicism and the faith. They're primed for it. And then at the end, you sell your books. You go to Barnes and Noble, people are like, who is this guy? And then they wander in and out. And, unless you're, I don't know, like Jonathan Franzen or something, or Mary Carr. So I think you can kind of craft these events to sort of really be the sweet spot. Now I find, I give a talk. I have one talk right now to talk on Jesus because I've been pushing this book, Jesus, a Pilgrimage. I got one talk. That's it. I don't really write up new talks. People actually, it's kind of funny. People say, well, how would you like to speak on women in the church since the Second Vatican Council? And I say, how about Jesus? And they say, okay. So I asked my publisher to have books there. The organization, now this may work different for people who aren't worried about making money, but the organization buys the books in bulk. They sell them at list, right? So they make a profit. The publisher's happy. I'm happy. I don't get as much royalties, so that might be different for other authors, but I don't have to lug a big carton of books. And you can do really well. You can sell 50, sometimes I sell 100 books. So it's good. It can be tiring though, but it's also gratifying to meet people who've read your book, and it's very moving. I mean, we say at American Magazine, or my old editor used to say, we sometimes forget that people read this stuff. You go through all the work and you publish, and you're like, oh, thank God. And then people say, oh, this is so beautiful, and thank you for this, or they take out an old book, and I love it. I mean, it's the personal interactions at the end that I really enjoy. That's fun.
So I should know the answer to this. I'm sorry that I don't, but on your website, is there a list of your upcoming speaking events?
No, and I'll tell you, there's a psychological reason for that. I do it about a week in advance. So this is a little confession. So I got a lot of speaking gigs coming up. If I put them all on a website, it would freak me out. I'm serious. I'm being totally serious.
It would just be too overwhelming.
I did that a couple of years ago, and I couldn't. I was like, oh my gosh, look at all those events. I can't believe it. It's terrible. So I do it one at a time for my sanity. So people who follow me, I put it on Facebook, on Twitter. So for example, this weekend I'm going to be at a place called Dalesford Abbey in Paoli, outside of Philadelphia, my hometown. And I put it up early this week. So you have plenty of time for people to plan and stuff like that. If I had to put up, I did it once on Facebook, and honestly, Brian, it just totally freaked me out. I was like, that I can't look at that, and I took it down.
Well, that's unfortunate because, I mean, I think your fans would like to know in advance when they're going to be, or when you're going to be near them.
Well, but I'll do it like a week before on Facebook, and that covers. And then people say, "Oh, I'll go to see you." And then but that's the other thing about Facebook. If you say I'm going to be at an event, people come up and say, "I saw this on Facebook."
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Well, you've got a lot of loyal followers, so I guess that explains it.
I hope so.
So one last question. Can you talk at all about the difference between writing for a book versus a magazine article versus a blog or a Facebook post?
Oh, sure. That's great. Well, I think the sort of quickest that you would dash off would be a Facebook post. I mean, I put up like meditations and things like that. That obviously has to be much shorter. Pardon me. But I don't worry too much about it being perfect, right? I mean, same with a blog. I mean, it's kind of an article. I blog at America Magazine. I don't have a blog, but and actually blogging is getting less popular. I've noticed people write
Oh, I agree.
articles
I've
instead.
heard
Yeah,
other people say the same thing.
yeah. No one has a blog anymore, right? They write articles, or some people do. So that's in terms of effort, that's the lowest. Articles, I think they're much easier, than writing a book. They can be a little more zippy. You can take a little more chances, I think. You can be a much more au courant. So I can make some joke about Snapchat or Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton in an article right now. I do not want to. I am very careful in my books about not making them dated. So I was even writing something today about looking at something on my phone, and I thought, how's that going to read in 20 years? Like even stuff like faxing, and so you certainly don't want to write. And I also think you just take more care with a book, because it's more, in a sense, it's more permanent. People are going to have it on their shelves. They're going to take it down, we hope. And so more permanent, and then it needs to be, the word I like is, it needs to be timeless. You should. It always kills me when I read books, particularly spirituality books, that say something like, yeah, and President, and then I just turned on the TV and I saw President Reagan saying this. I said, oh my gosh, it feels so dated. So why don't you say, I turned on the TV and I saw the president? So I think that's part of it. I think part of it is writing in a book. It needs to be a little more polished and less dated.
Excellent advice. Makes a whole lot of sense.
Thanks.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. This has been so insightful, so enjoyable. I hope that all of our fans got a lot out of it, and I really appreciate you spending the time with us to do this.
Thank you, Brian. My pleasure, and thanks to all the people who tuned in. I really appreciate it.